It is here, the Overwatch Lore Bible that we've been waiting for the past nearly 8 years is finally here. Hey and welcome, I'm Hammeh, and today we're going to be doing a little review on a top level of Overwatch Declassified, the book that talks about all of Overwatch's lore and story, goes through loads of details from before the First Omnic Crisis to just before the point and just around the point of Overwatch Recall. Now, I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of videos about this book in particular, so if you enjoy this kind of thing, throw a like, subscribe, let me know anything you'd like to know in the comments below. Love to hear your thoughts, but let's get stuck in. Time codes in the description below if you'd like to skip. Firstly, a little summary as to what the book is actually about. Now, this is a record filling in the past of Overwatch to a point. It takes us from the years of pre-crisis to just after the point of the museum, the Overwatch intro cinematic from 2014, and refers a little bit to the present day. It's a large and ambitious world-building effort. It answers quite a few questions about the previous Overwatch world and lore of the past. It gives some background, and it does create some new questions, as many as it actually answers, just to give you a heads up. Now, the detail, particularly in the pre-First Omnic Crisis world and in the world of the Omnic Crisis, goes pretty deep. It does a good effort at explaining the wider world and how the world came to be that the Omnic Crisis arose, and then specifics as to what happened during the Omnic Crisis, as well as Overwatch's role and the world after the Omnic Crisis, going straight through to the downfall of Overwatch. So lots of, let's say, filling in of gaps and giving world building and context to a lot of events that we know and have seen little bits of information about previously. So how this book is actually structured and framed. Now, the setting is a research team working on a set of papers in the Overwatch universe, a set of information called the Zurich Archive, and this information has been recently declassified. The author says that through this, it's actually possible to tell this story from different perspectives, but it's primarily focused around the history of the world through the frame of the necessity for Overwatch, the First Omnic Crisis, Overwatch's creation, operations during the crisis and after the crisis, and its downfall. So it's all framed through Overwatch. Now, there's a line in the very first couple of pages saying, "Remember, we are thinking people, not programs designed only for the collation of data, and we will never be able to fully divorce ourselves and our opinions from this project." Now, as much as the fictional author of this book in the universe says that, it's fairly safe to say that that probably refers not only to the thoughts of Sean Maguire, the author, but also the Blizzard and Overwatch narrative teams working on this book. Now, the whole team in universe who worked on this research, the narrative construct, the research team that published this history of Overwatch in universe, is listed along with their bios, so you can perhaps identify their thoughts and potential personal biases due to their authorship. Now, ever since probably the original Chris Metzen days of the development of Project Titan and Overwatch story through to the Michael Chu and beyond times, we've always had this concept of an Overwatch story being told by different narrators, some of them unreliable, and some of them telling stories from their perspective in their tone to suit their purposes. Atlas News is a great example of this in previous Overwatch lore materials. Now, we knew it before, but the book firmly sets Overwatch in our world in an alternative near future. There's a lot of citing of real-world events and examples. For example, with regard to nuclear disasters, the book directly cites in Overwatch's universe 3 Mile Island of the US, Chernobyl and Fukushima as being 3 of the biggest nuclear accidents of the last century. The book structures itself in chapters shown here, which I will summarize chapter by chapter in terms of their topics and how they go about addressing different topics and information. Now, the book with these 10 chapters and with this map of major events shown here, very familiar to any of you who have watched my previous videos or followed Overwatch lore for however long, be it the last 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, or since 2014, 8 years, you'll be very familiar with these kind of 4 periods. A lot of Overwatch lore fans and sort of timeliners and similar try and approach. Firstly, the book details about the pre-crisis world. From medicine to hydroponics, from climate change to clean energy, there is a lot of focus on science, the advances of the time, and also the benefits and problems that these caused. Now, for fans of speculative fiction or kind of futurology, thinking about the world in the future or similar, this can get into real levels of actual potential detail. The author, Sean Maguire, jokes on Twitter that she was quite surprised how nerdy the Overwatch team let her get about algae, for example. And indeed, in this first section, things like clean energy technology and algae and its impact on various things, as well as creating more oxygen. There is a real attempt with all different kinds of science and challenges that the world had and technologies that were being developed to tie them together into a cohesive narrative that shows the advances of the Overwatch near future, but also the realistic problems in the world that they would have caused too. An example of genetically modified seeds, and a legal battle, meaning that they could not be ever patented, meaning that this technology could be widely rolled out effectively for low cost. Also had impacts on farmers. They couldn't make so much money, for example, because of increasing climate changes and challenges, meaning that mega farms, for example, became a thing. And these then got taken over by bigger bodies and bigger companies. There are large sections on God programs and their involvement, not only in the world, but also their different fields and specialisms pre-crisis, as well as Omnic Corporation and its history. A lot, of course, to do with Omnic technology and development is mentioned. Mina Liao also has some more history there. And we're really given an insight behind the scenes of Omnica and a few more details behind what we know already as to how Omnica got into the situation it got in before the First Omnic Crisis. There's also pieces about space technology, about the genetic research on the moon, and this first section really pulls together everything to do with how an Overwatch bright, technologically advanced future came to pass, but also how the benefits and challenges of those came together and resulted in the world being in a position for something like the First Omnic Crisis to occur. The next section is to do with the Omnic Crisis starting, retelling of it on a global basis, going almost key country by key country. It's not every country, but they call out a few different ones. There's particular detail with regards to how Omnica got into its position, how Anubis, for we know that Anubis was the key sort of kickoff behind the First Omnic Crisis, got into that position and started the first great sort of global Omnic war, as it were, and then how various countries were affected, how they fought back, how they attacked, even including individuals. There's great detail, for example, for several pages about New York. Canada's story, for example, with a look at Vivian Chase. Sojourn is told. Of course, we've seen that in the Sojourn novel. Portugal and Spain and the Martanz's impact on that particular area, but more about my thoughts on that later. I particularly enjoyed the focus on India and the focus on India as being a leading area along with Sigmund Kuiper Sigma's maglev technology, cheaper and more efficient space launches and their role in the crisis, particularly with regards to keeping satellites in the air against Anubis's anti-satellite warfare. There's even great detail on countries such as Sweden, Russia, and naming oh so many new people, as well as even particular innovations in different areas, seeing how humanity invented new solutions to many of the crisis problems. Nigeria is covered, and the role of the first Doomfist in protecting the area. Russia's response to the crisis and the stories of heroic Svyatogor mech pilots out of Volskaya Industries, including one detonating a small local nuclear plant in order to stop Omnics from traversing a key piece of terrain and a key route towards eastern Russia. For each nation a story, for each nation several heroes, and indeed various fates for all of them. Many of them did not make it out alive. The next section then goes over the idea of Overwatch, a lot to do with Gabrielle Adawi and her position at the UN, the politics around getting Overwatch even as an idea to be voted on by various people globally, and the history in terms of getting the Overwatch project online in the first place, even before recruitment started, going through even things like the support structure. Previous names, experts in their field, are then pulled into the foundation of Overwatch, including even lawyers and a named lawyer earlier in the text. So there's a real effort throughout Overwatch Declassified. If someone is named or introduced for something, there is an effort to integrate them into the universe more than just a name drop, and altogether it comes together in a way that I quite enjoy. After an entire chapter on how the idea of Overwatch was devised, put together in a practical sense, it then focuses on the heroes that we know and love in the First Strike team and their recruitment, as well as their early operations, a bit more on their histories in some cases, and first missions as a unit. Of course, we get more on Jack Morrison and Gabriel Reyes, a bit more about their relationship and the passing of command in the early days of Overwatch and after the First Omnic Crisis, and even more about the Soldier Enhancement Program and the lady who was the boss of it. Dr. Victoria Norton comes up several times in this book, and it's interesting to hear a bit more about the program and how it actually came to pass, with the high attrition and death rate of the early program, and with Reyes and Morrison potentially being only of the two initial examples and indeed surviving soldiers and people who could be shown off as examples of the program's success. As a quick note on the framing, this official in-universe history of Overwatch cites that Jack Morrison is dead. There may be speculation on the identity of the mercenary known as Soldier 76 due to his code of 76 in the Soldier Enhancement Program, and it also cites Gabriel Reyes as being dead. So obviously different narrators in universe with different lore materials that we've seen so far. This Overwatch Declassified book and its framing very much takes the official in-universe perspective of here is what is said officially to be the case. We receive more detail on Ana's recruitment and indeed the Egyptian military not wanting to let her go. Various local militaries and governments were not compensated or indeed given extra support for an Overwatch agent being recruited from their ranks, and many countries wanted their best people to defend their own territory. We learn more of the Crusader program, of the rise of Reinhard Wilhelm, of the creators of the Crusader, both armor and shielding technology, and of the fact that Crusaders primarily only really did shielding duties and shielding work before a new wave of people came through with upgrades of the suits, with the thrusters to give them more mobility and indeed the ability to be more offensive rather than defensive, of which Reinhardt was a key proponent in the early days. More details on Torbjorn's history and how he came to join Overwatch, as well as his opinions on Omnics and AI sentience pre-Omnic Crisis, and a lot more besides. So a great framing of new information on the original Strike Team and indeed the Omnic Crisis. The next chapter goes through effectively Overwatch going a bit more on the offensive and trying to identify what was behind this, focusing on Anubis and then their missions, firstly against the Detroit Omnium that's already been detailed, but then also against Anubis in Cairo. It also talks more about Liao and her desires and efforts to find another solution, and indeed how she came to work with and get Aurora to agree to her effectively uploading her sentience into all Omnics worldwide. With the events known as the Awakening and of course the final attack on Cairo, with over 1 billion people apparently dead, the Omnic Crisis was over. There's a lot of talk in the next chapter about the fragile peace afterwards, about the consolidation of Overwatch as an organisation, Gabriella Darway leaving and then going to found Nimbani, Operation White Dome, and a lot more granular detail where watch points were around the world, the recruitment of Angela Ziegler, a bit more about Cassidy and his recruitment, the foundation of Blackwatch, the Australian Liberation Front and the destruction of the Australian Omnium, leading to the formation of Junkertown, and many, many more things besides, including Liao's work on AI once more, in the form of Athena. Everything from Overwatch's initial missions struggling to find its place, image control, PR missions, and even the first Blackwatch missions are documented. There's great detail at this point on missions to Australia and support after the crisis at the Omnium with the Australian Liberation Front, problems in South Korea and the various waves of Guishin with the giant Omnic that was self-creating perhaps from an Omnium beneath the sea, and much, much more. Throughout all of this, peppered a lot of names. Soundquake recanonized as an Overwatch agent who was successful and part of defending South Korea. Fusionator was even mentioned as another one of the flashy agents helping with Overwatch images. Fusionator name-checked as an agent again from the early Overwatch 2014 announced cinematic from BlizzCon. As Gerard Lacroix and Gabriel Reyes working together, as well as the holidays that they took occasionally with Cassidy to sneak into places where Overwatch wasn't officially welcome happened. Eco points and their details, as well as the slow rise of Null Sector, were also detailed here. Around a decade after the first Omnic Crisis had ended, the chapter then details things such as the mission against the Shimada clan, but also Overwatch's gradual problems that were threatening to tear it apart. Genji's recruitment, the recruitment of Moira, the loss of Eco Point Antarctica, the Polynesian League wanting to take back their Eco Point that they had previously given over to Overwatch, and many, many more things. As Liao began work on Echo, her most ambitious AI project yet since Aurora, Gerard Lacroix dies in Oslo, and we are brought into the events of Overwatch Retribution. The Venice incident, the fall of the Horizon lunar colony, a bit more on Winston's recruitment. There are a lot of events in this section that we know and have a lot of detail about previously, but nice little details are sewn around them. Trace's recruitment, the events of Overwatch Uprising, and the various pressures on Overwatch before the events of in-game event Storm Rising are covered. We actually do get some nice details on why Reinhardt had to retire. He effectively made a decision on a mission which meant that a lot of valuable technical and classified data got stolen, even though Reinhardt managed to successfully rescue many hostages, some of whom were beginning to be disposed of by the person who had taken them captive. Arna's death, the rise of the new Doomfist, the capture of Maximilian, the events of Storm Rising, and then the capture of Doomfist are all detailed, including with some wonderful new art here. Spoiler alert, we still don't get an answer as to precisely what caused the destruction of the Swiss headquarters. That, after 8 years of wondering, is still left for another day, even though we know that a lot more Overwatch agents were there at the time than we previously thought. With some more detail on Overwatch's decommissioning via the Petrus Act, the remaining years between the Petrus Act and indeed the present day are sewn up with some of the world's problems coming together and tied together with things such as Viscar expansion, the escape of Doomfist, the rise and creation of Mecha Squad, and other such more present day facts. With the events of the original cinematic at the Overwatch New York Museum, we are brought up to present day with some Overwatch agents, apparently according to the authors in universe of this book, as being rogue around the world and debating their use and indeed their role in trying to keep the world safe from current threats. So there you have it. That's the structure. I didn't want to go through detail by detail because I'd like to A, give you a chance to read it yourself if you like, and B, I'd like to round up and do some other videos about these kinds of pieces in a more sort of categorized and studied way. But that's the rough structure of the book. Now, a couple of things now as to what it does and doesn't include. I know a lot of people have a lot of specific questions. So to be honest with you, stories that are covered in depth elsewhere or stories that are already told are not covered hugely here. And that makes sense. They're nodded to, but a lot of them are written as if the authors don't know everything. They are not us. They're not like, the gods, the omniscient sort of like viewpoint, with the omnipotent ability to access any information that there is. So these authors, for example, believe that Morrison and Reyes are dead unless proven otherwise. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Retribution is a good example of this. This talks around the official side. It says we don't know what Morrison knew and whether Reyes said anything to him or not. Obviously, when we read the Retribution comic, we know exactly what happened between the two because we've seen it from a different viewpoint. So this is not a piece that is meant to be read in isolation. It's meant to then get you to go and read the comics and go and take a look at the short stories and get things from different perspectives that we already know, if you're an Overwatch lore fan, are already out there. The book does include a lot of new facts, a lot of background, some in very, very granular detail on both the science and society and the pre-crisis world in particular, everything from climate change through to hemorrhagic fevers and medical advances. Clearly, a lot of effort and thought has been put in by Seanan Maguire and indeed the Blizzard Central narrative team and indeed the Overwatch narrative team on how to pull all of these ideas and all of this world together in a way that feels credible and, of course, speculative. Of course, there are some big jumps in various places, but in any piece of speculative or, future-facing fiction or indeed fantastic fiction of any kind, you're always having this kind of willing suspension of disbelief. Shout out to Samuel Taylor Coleridge there. For me, some of it stretches the boundaries a little bit of disbelief, but it's a nice delivery for me and on the whole is very, very nice in terms of pulling the world together into a cohesive and a much wider and deeper place upon which things such as the Omnic Crisis and other events and our Overwatch heroes and indeed villains of the world play out their lives. Now, in terms of what it specifically doesn't include, I find it interesting, and this probably represents both the author and also the Overwatch team and perhaps their attitude and approach to narrative. It says so many times in this book that it is what it is. It's a historical chronicle of the origins of Overwatch. It says, we could not talk about every event in the Omnic Crisis, so we will talk about it from this perspective. We have our own narrative biases, so we will talk about it from that perspective. And many, many times, almost every chapter, or every other chapter, at the beginning of other chapter, it restates the framing of the book and what they will and won't discuss within it, both in universe, but also it's shouting out to us, the reader, you're not going to get everything, but we're going to talk about these particular things because we can't talk about everything because the scope is too wide. That said, there are some things that are clearly not put in there. Although we get the answers to some big questions like why Reinhardt retired from Overwatch. There's a whole sort of page story about that and the sort of mission that led to that happening. We do not get the answers to other big questions such as why did the Swiss HQ blow up, what exactly happened there, and things that have been asked for sort of a big bunch of time. So within the universe, within the framing, these researchers don't know, they don't know within the world. That's clearly a story that's still being saved for another time at some point. And I find it interesting that if Blizzard want to move the story forward, they still leaving holes to talk about the past. Indeed, they've talked about them with Ramatra, they've talked about them with Liao and similar. So to be realistic, you're not going to get all of the answers to all the big meaty questions here, but you do get nice background amongst events that we've known about previously. We knew a bit from Mercy's short story Valkyrie as to the conditions under which she joined Overwatch, for example, and that's further expanded upon in the book in little ways. To be clear as well, this book does not have one solid attempt in terms of direct timelining, so it doesn't set up everything with dates beyond those key events which don't have dates next to them in the first few pages of the book. There are some relative dates given, enough to keep avid date watchers and timeliners fed and to cross-check them. For transparency, I haven't sat down and gone through them with regards to all of the timeline stuff I have, or indeed other people have done before yet. I will in another video. I'm going to check to see how accurate or self-cohesive it is or not, but it broadly sticks to the big beats. So for example, nearly 2 decades after, Overwatch solved the Omnic Crisis, it was forced to retire in disgrace, for example. Beats that have been set up in terms of that 2 decades of time have been kept in. And finally, I should hope that it's obvious, but there aren't huge expositions on every single character. There is, of course, a primary focus around members of Overwatch and the original Strike team. There's a bit on the different Doomfists, including the original Doomfist. This is an Overwatch history, and other characters will be reflected on around the prism of Overwatch, but it's clearly constructed with gaps left to tell. There are pieces on Omnic Sentience, there are pieces on the Awakening, there are pieces on the Shambali, and indeed a little bit on Mandata, but Zenyatta's story is clearly for separate places, such as we've seen in the PvE. The thing to conclude on here is that this was very clearly meant to draw a line with Overwatch being out in the world, and not even the events necessarily of 0 Hour being touched on in here. So given that this book was announced really kind of in late 2021, as far as I recall, it was meant to be out late 2022 with Overwatch's launch, and then it was delayed until 2023, and we've got it kind of 2 years later. Now, I'm no expert on getting books published, but 1 to 2 years from what I've read and from what I've talked about with some people who have and who work in that space is not an uncommon period of time for something to go from a first draft sort of manuscript or the deal being agreed and announced phase through to launch. It is quite a chunk of time here, though. So really, this could have taken that long. I think that honestly, there has been a decision to delay this book and delayed it beyond the launch of Overwatch 2. A lot has happened in that couple of years of time. I would not be surprised if this book started in a very different form, maybe a couple of years back when it was first announced and Sean McGuire was announced to be involved with it, and to what's been delivered here as in 2023, 2 years later. It does feel to me, in terms of like what I do like and don't like, I love the detail here. I love the world building here. There's over almost 50 new names, I believe. And of course, every name is tied in a way that it feels credible. It's not just name dropping for lore fans and hero speculators. And then there are many times in the book where it cross references and people come back. What I'm not 100% sure on is that I can almost see, and McGuire herself does say on Twitter she had little control over some of the final copy and some of the final framing. This is probably, I would posit or guess, normal for someone if you're working with a brand. The editing stages and the final editing may be a little bit different in terms of when you're working with a brand in a branded universe as opposed to working with your own novel and your own universe. It feels to me at points, and this is probably a minor criticism, and I can understand it to a point, but it does feel to me, how to phrase it, that as this book has probably, I feel, been delayed a year, and I feel that whatever the reasons for delaying that are, obviously the Overwatch team at some point decided, as we know, to cancel hero missions and to re-sculpt their vision of what PvE and Overwatch 2 was going to be. I do wonder if this book was delayed alongside those decisions, and I would not be 100% surprised if in the intervening year there have been some decisions to tweak a few things given that decision and given what was going to be happening with the PvE missions. We see in the PvE missions, for example, as we go through Canada and the Toronto mission, the big tease as to who this Omnic threat is, who this voice is talking as Overwatch are trying to sort out what's going on in Toronto. But of course, we'd already had Ramatra revealed. And when the Overwatch team made these decisions to try and start releasing content, and whenever they decided to reform what Overwatch 2's PvE was going to be, I feel that Ramatra was released kind of as not as a stopgap or as a stop measure, but I feel that Ramatra was never meant to be released. He was meant to be teased. He was meant to be announced further into the Overwatch 2 PvE story. He was either a big beat in the story at the end. It does feel like Ramatra was a bit of in case of fire, let's break glass and get something out, and it almost undermines slightly the Overwatch 2 first sort of set of PvE missions. So in the midst of all of that framework and however these things worked, I feel that really this is a great book. I really enjoy it. I really, really recommend that you read it if you have the chance to buy it, have the chance to give it a read. But it does feel to me that like as much as that process was going on late 2022, early 2023, I do wonder if there are some tweaks in this book. But it feels that at places in this book, there are sort of examples of things where maybe things have been tweaked a little bit. They were either, always known to be popular with the community, but it feels like some things have been written up a little more at various places. I don't know. So does Overwatch Declassified sort of succeed? What's the sort of final thoughts? Well, for me, this is like a 28 quid book in the UK, 28 pounds, depending on where you buy it, $37-ish, maybe 34 to 38 euros. It's certainly less than 2 La Seraphim individual skin bundles if you're buying a particular hero skin bundle solo. It's less than the Ultimate Season Battle Pass for Moira, but that's one way of quantifying people's value and time. And I'm not going to tell you how to quantify and value your time and money. It's just the way I see it personally. It's not, I appreciate, even at that price, even whatever you compare it to, you could compare it to a cinema ticket or two, you could compare it to a full price game, whatever the price. It's not instant purchase for anyone in these sort of challenging and slightly stretched times. I bought mine, to be super clear. This is my hobby. This is something I'm interested in. This wasn't something that was given to me. In terms of value for me, I certainly got a few days out of reading of it. I will get more days of reading out of it over and over in detail. It's a 200-page book, as I mentioned, a lot of new art, a lot of nice pictures, new details and stories. If you're a fan of Overwatch, the lore and world building in general, it's a really nice just book. It's a really nice text, and I really appreciate the way that Maguire and the team who have edited and supported her in the writing of it have kind of pulled things together. So a fan of this from my side of things. Do have some small criticisms or some small wonderings, but at the end of the day, it's a person on the outside looking in and personal preferences or personal opinions on my side. So there we have it. Feeling many ways, I guess, kind of like the end of an era, or if you're going for a Winston Churchill quote, it's not the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. It does feel that, like, with Overwatch Declassified, both Blizzard and sort of people around it and storytelling around it are trying to draw a line over the past and saying, okay, you've been asking for years, nearly 8 years or so, about various details about the backgrounds and things of various characters, about what happened before the Omnic Crisis, during the Omnic Crisis. This feels, and bearing in mind that this book was kind of, as I said, introduced, like I believe in 2021, like we've been waiting nearly 2 years since announcement for this book to come out, and a lot has happened in Overwatch and more in that time. It feels like this is an attempt to sort of draw some lines under it and very much give Blizzard the capacity to move the story forward. Now, I enjoy this, given that around BlizzCon 2023, interviews done afterwards, Blizzard have kind of given this vibe of, we know that Overwatch has succeeded as being a PvP game, that's where we want to focus, as well as the pivot away from hero mode. We had our story missions. If you enjoy Overwatch lore and story, this is a very, very nice thing to have. I know 28 quid, $37, 38 euros is very much a considered purchase, but me personally, I'm not going to tell people how to spend their money, but I would rather have something I can feel and hold in my hands, and keep and treasure and read and re-enjoy, perhaps above some other things, but up to you. If you enjoy story, this is a lovely, lovely thing to have. So there we have it. What do you think if you've read it? If you haven't read it yet, I'm going to be making a bunch more videos, so if you throw a like, subscribe, I'd really, really appreciate that. Comment below with any things you'd like to see from it, any details, things you'd like to see explored more. I wanted this to be a review, to not spoil everything and to give people the opportunity to go and get and read themselves if they fancy, but if that's not an option for you right now, many more videos coming out over the coming week, and indeed on Overwatch lore and things in general. I think I'm going to get my content going a little bit more again. And as a last little ask, if you don't mind going have a look at Hammeh Lore, HAMMEHLORE, over on TikTok, maybe throwing that a follow. I'm going to be doing lots more short content there, as well as part of getting going again, so it'd be great to see you over there too. Cheers for tuning in. I've been Hammeh. Take it easy.